Slavery in America began in our nation's first moments, but it was never right. Although some argued it was acceptable or even beneficial to make one group live in misery so that another could be rich, it never was, and it was the responsibility of every free American to aid those who were enslaved and seeking freedom. It was the right of those that were enslaved to accept help from good free Americans. The Underground Railroad was one manifestation of this, though there were others. The Underground Railroad was a network of safe houses and routes used to move enslaved people from the South through the free states of North and to Canada and to freedom.
The Underground Railroad was a system to help slaves get out of bondage. Slaves who ran away would be passed from safe house to safe house by conductors who would generally hide them during the day and later sink them further along the road to Canada and freedom. These helpers were called conductors on the Underground Railroad.
The first time the words Underground Railroads were used was in 1831 when Tice Davids escaped from their plantation in Kentucky to freedom to Ohio. Those slaves and indentured servants had been running away from their bondage since Jamestown Colony. The first mention of the Underground Railroad running through New York was also in the 19th century. Since helping escaped slaves was a crime, there is uncertainty about many facts regarding the Underground Railroad, but most historians agree that around 30,000 to 40,000 slaves tried to escape from America to Upper Canada, now known as Ontario.
Some escaped from New York. Each census up to 1820 counted New York slaves. Steuben County's highest number was 87 in 1810. Ontario had 212 in the same year, and Allegheny 21. The highest total statewide was 21,193 in 1790. Every one of those lives lived with terror and tragedy looming. Although New York formally ended slavery in 1827, it was still not a free state. Any escaped slave found in New York were supposed to be returned to their former owners as stolen property, so most chose to keep running north to Canada. The main routes of the Underground Railroad went east up the Hudson and west through Buffalo, but still a trickle of fugitives passed through Steuben County. Some of those passed through the McBurney House in Canisteo.
Ironically, the house is named for its original owner, Mr. James McBurney, who was a slaveholder in the 1800s in Canisteo, New York. The house was built in 1797, making it the oldest house known to Steuben County. McBurney was not the only slave owner in Steuben County. Enslavement in Canisteo was far from common. There were only two other slave owners in the area, George Hornell and James Headley, and the total number of slaves was no higher than 87.
McBurney had no children, so upon his death in 1820, and without immediate heirs, his nephew Mr. Thomas McGee moved into the home. McGee was not a slave owner. Instead, he worked to make Canisteo a stop on the Underground Railroad and opened his home to fugitives. He continued to help even after the 1851 Fugitive Slave Law imposed heavy penalties for helping slaves escape.
McGee was not alone. There were other stops around the area, including the Cooper Farmhouse in Truxton, the William Carman House in Mecklenburg, the Pitt Homestead in Honeoye, a two-story farmhouse in Little York, and the Cobblestone Farm in Canandaigua.
Slavery had an impact that took a hit on Steuben County. Captain William Helm brought in over 100 slaves from Virginia to be yanked from their families and sent to a new master because Helm lost them in a game of cards, which was even worse. He lost a lot. Thanks to Robert Troup and others, New York slavery ended on the 4th of July in 1827. The fact McGee was able to contradict his own family opinions is a huge deal. Others standing up to slavery was also a huge deal. It opened up so many doors for others to pass through to help and learn from these problems in the future. Underground railroads made owning slaves very expensive, and this also made people a dangerous investment. People seeing slaves caught led to a terribly bad press for slave owning. This forced non-slave holders to stand up to slavery. They couldn't ignore slavery when slave catchers were all over New York.